The original one came from St. Anselm, where he was trying to think of a be-all, end-all argument that would get us everything we want about God, because like the cosmological argument can get you necessity, the moral argument can get you God's moral perfection, but you can't get moral perfection from the cosmological argument.
We're going to have a philosophical conversation today on the ontological argument. So give us a brief history of the ontological argument, and then tell us how you began to focus so much of your time on really what's a controversial case for the existence of God.
Okay. It's fair to say that there are ontological arguments instead of one per se, which is the case with all arguments in natural theology. There's multiple versions of the cosmological argument, moral argument, and so on. The original one came from St. Anselm, where he was trying to think of a be-all, end-all argument that would get us everything we want about God, because like the cosmological argument can get you necessity, the moral argument can get you God's moral perfection, but you can't get moral perfection from the cosmological argument. At least I'm unaware of any examples where that would work, and I don't see how it would. And so he came up with this idea that God is the greatest conceivable thing, and that was kind of the thing that started the ball rolling. Now, to my knowledge, I don't think anybody still like defends Anselm's version as saying, yeah, that's a really, really good version of it. No, right. I don't think so. Later on, Descartes gave an ontological argument, and nobody really defends that anymore. The joke I heard people say is Descartes convinced himself of all of his own philosophy and pretty much nobody else. And then basically most philosophers thought this is just a bad argument until around, I want to say about the 1950s, maybe 1960s, when some philosophers of religion looked into the developments in modal logic, which is the logic of possibility and necessity, and realized, oh, wait, we can take what's been applied, we've learned in modal logic, and make ontological arguments for God for this. And that's where you get modal ontological arguments. Now, some scholars like the late Charles Hortzhorn and Norman Malcolm think you can actually find modal versions of it in Anselm if you read him carefully looking for that. That's kind of controversial because it's like, well, Anselm didn't know about modal logic. Was he really doing that? And it gets into a whole other things. But the modal versions are generally agreed to be the best by people who research this. If you want to make an ontological argument, make a modal one. And from the research I've done, what's considered the absolute best one, the gold pinnacle standard, is one that Kurt Gödel gave. And he didn't even like publish it. It was in stuff that got published posthumously. Gödel was like a master logician and probably didn't do it because he was trying to prove God. He was probably just trying to work out the logic of it. But it's also the case that without a great deal of study in modal logic, it's very unlikely you're going to understand that one. So the next best one, everyone agrees, is something along the lines of the version Plantinga gives. And pretty much everybody else who has tried to make a good one since then has done something pretty similar to what Plantinga did. He originally published it in The Nature of Necessity, but I don't recall the date of that off the top of my head. I think it was somewhere in the 60s. So